Senator Mike Lee of the great state of Utah. How are you, sir?
Doing great. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing great. Kinda. You know, I'm watching the country, and it's very upsetting to me. You went to the Senate floor today. I thought you made some very, very important points about representative government. Would you like to summarize some of that for the American people, please?
I'd love to. Look, the United States Congress is the sole lawmaking body within our constitutional framework. In order to do its job, it has to actually show up. Congress right now has two choices. It can either legislate and reconvene, or it can stay in recess and not legislate. It can't do both. That's why I took to the Senate floor today to explain that we can't go on like this. We can't have a Congress that's routinely passing these big appropriations bills while the Senate's in recess. It doesn't work. It's not constitutional. It's not consistent with the spirit, if not also the letter of the Constitution, and we have to avoid it.
You know, Senator Lee, when Tom Massey brought this up, and he was absolutely correct, and he was just talking about a 24-hour delay. He was brutalized by the left and the right, by people in Congress and in the administration and the president. He's talking about a 24-hour delay. Nancy Pelosi shuts things down for weeks at a time, and she comes under relatively mild criticism. Have we lost our way? I mean, I'm watching all this now. I'm watching the violation of civil liberties. I mean, we can mitigate without telling people in cars they can't go to their parishes, or shutting down gun stores, or telling one surfer in the damn Atlantic Ocean and arresting him because he's violating some order. I'm looking around the country, to be honest with you, and I'm not recognizing it.
Yeah, no, it's frightening. By the way, I'm a huge Thomas Massey fan, and I love the man. I love the fact that he's willing to stand up for the Constitution. And you point out something very significant. Nancy Pelosi held this thing up for days. She has since held it up for weeks, and she hasn't taken any serious criticism in the press. Thomas Massey held it up for maybe a few hours or a few minutes, and did so in defense of the Constitution, and he's skewered for it. That's not fair, but this is importantly, he's making a point that I think we all need to remember, which is that you can't have a Congress that's legislating in absentia. It doesn't work, but we got to fix that.
In fact, let me ask you, Senator Lee, if a Congress is legislating without its members present, then who's actually legislating? A relative handful of people.
Yes, not just a relatively small handful of people, but a really small. I mean, a few hours ago when I took the Senate floor, I pointed out that Chuck Schumer had just been on the floor talking about something that they had negotiated successfully late last night. And I pointed out this isn't an actual negotiation. An actual negotiation involves the parties present. This just involves like 2, 3, maybe 4 members of Congress with names like McConnell, Schumer, Pelosi, and McCarthy. That's not an actual negotiation. This is lawmaking in absentia and to some extent by extortion, and it's wrong.
Now, how does this damage the country going forward?
Well, the minute we get into the mindset that says it's okay for 4 people to legislate and then behave as if the entire 435-member House and 100-member Senate has actually acted, that opens the door to all kinds of horrible things, not just for our constitutional framework, not just for limited government, but for representative government itself. That's not a direction we want to go. So we've got to make sure this is not a habit that sticks.
Which will be tough to do, because now we've set what they like to call precedent. And some of these people like precedent more than they like the Constitution, don't they?
Yes, they do. And as I pointed out on the Senate floor this afternoon, they like convenience more than anything else. This is very, very dangerous. Look, Mark, we knew from the time we became a country some 2.5 centuries ago that the reason we wanted a republic, a constitutional republic, was not because it's convenient. And in fact, a constitutional republic like ours is one of the least efficient ways of doing business. It's not convenient, it's not efficient, but it does safeguard liberty. And so we can't ever let Congress convince us that for not for the sake of convenience of its people, but for the convenience of its own members, that it needs to not reconvene while legislating. We can't ever accept that as a valid answer. It's nonsense.
Are you concerned that even before this is quote-unquote voted on, that the administration and Congress, the Treasury Secretary, is talking about Phase 4 for infrastructure and broadband and state bailouts and so forth. Are we going to destroy this country economically by pretending to save it economically?
Yeah, we are, and we're already doing it, and we've got to get off of that habit. And look, let me say something about this. I'm sure he's a good man. He seems like a nice enough guy to me. But Steve Minuchin is not a United States senator, nor is he a United States congressman. I have no idea why it is that he's out there negotiating this stuff, which is not very good and contains all sorts of Democratic priorities, instead of members of Congress. I don't understand it, and I certainly don't like it. And regardless of what you think about the fact that he himself is a Democrat, he's not a member of the Congress, and he has no business doing that. I don't understand this.
And I guess what concerns me is this. I'm watching members of Congress broadcasting from their basements. And you can tell, they have the 5 o'clock shadow, and it looks like East Germany in the background and so forth. Saying that I'm going to vote for this. They're not voting for anything, are they?
No, they're not voting for anything, because you can't vote if you're not here, and they're not here. Meanwhile, Mark, you've got people, you've got cops, you've got EMTs, you've got emergency room personnel, people who run grocery stores, and pharmacies. They're all showing up. They're doing their job. They're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Members of Congress, they're not. It's not to say they're not doing anything. I'm sure that, like me, they've been having all sorts of phone calls. But they're not doing the one thing that only they can do, which is vote. And for them to suggest they're voting for something when they're not voting at all is shameful.
I mean, they can put on the masks, put on the gloves, have the hand sanitizer, keep 6 feet apart, right? And still vote. Everything.
Yeah, exactly. It's not that hard. And, we've all seen the movie Boy in the Plastic Bubble. If we had to go to something like that, so be it. But we can't make laws unless we are together. And you can't make laws unless you're here to vote. They've got to do it. And especially in the Senate. There are lots of ways you can do this while distancing. In fact, we did it before we recessed a few weeks ago. We held the votes out longer. We encouraged members to come and go so that they didn't have to interact with other members. Even the floor staff sat back at a distance. This works, but we have to show up and do our freaking job.
Senator Lee, can you hold on through the break? I want to ask you about federalism.
I'd love to.
All right. Senator Mike Lee from Utah is actually in Washington. Apparently he's an essential employee. The others are not. We'll be right back.
The one-man antidote for liberal media bias. Mark Levin. Call him now at 877-381-3811.
Now, Mike Lee, I keep reading the Senate passed this bill. The Senate didn't pass a damn thing. I mean, there wasn't a roll call vote, was there?
No, there wasn't a roll call vote. There was what's called a voice vote. But we didn't have a quorum. We're not appropriately convened. We're not convened at all. We were in what's called a pro forma session. And this isn't okay. I mean, look, people are going to look the other way this time around, I suppose, because of the global pandemic. But we can't let this continue. This is not how legislation works. You shouldn't be passing any legislation like this, let alone legislation that spends $500 billion.
Well, disorder is becoming the regular order, isn't it? Now, let me ask you a question, Senator Lee, about federalism. We hear this word thrown around. We hear Governor Cuomo saying federalism while he has hat in hand for everything. And now he wants a bailout by the federal taxpayer and all the other states when he was running a $6.1 billion deficit, which the New York Post called shocking back in November. And so I fear what's going to happen now, and it sounds like the president's up to this, supporting this as well, based on what he was saying today, or at least Minuchin, which is, we need to help the states. Now, I got to ask you this. On the one hand, Cuomo says, don't interfere with my decisions. I'll decide whether I open the economy, even if it affects interstate commerce. I'm in charge here, but ventilators, hospital beds, bailouts, everything. He wants you, the senator of Utah, to subsidize them. What do you make of this kind of federalism? I call it one-way federalism, which isn't federalism at all.
Yeah, I call it fake federalism. Another term I've heard used for it came from you, Mark, and see, it was
it a curse word?
Tyranny, I believe.
Oh,
No,
okay.
it was no. You called it crony federalism.
Mm-hmm.
In your great book, Liberty and Tyranny, you talked about the crony federalism that occurs when governors and state legislators line up half in hand to go and ask Congress for more money. And really what it amounts to is they're coming here not because they like us or not because they want to believe that we have more power, but because they know that we can essentially print more. I mean, technically it's borrowing more, but in effect, it's just printing more money. This is how the problem perpetuates itself, and it's wrong.
Doesn't this kind of spending at the federal level undermine the whole notion of federalism? I mean, I understand. We want decisions to be made at the state level more often than not, state police powers. But if the states are going to make these decisions and then say, I want to be bailed out for my decisions, you can't have it one way. That doesn't work.
No, exactly. And that's one of the things that disturbs me about the steady drift away from federalism that we've seen ever since April 12th, 1937, when the Supreme Court decided a case called NLRB versus Jones and Laughlin Steel. Nobody talked about that case because the schools don't...
Wait a minute. I talked about that on Fox last week, believe it or not.
That's fantastic.
Tell them about the 1942 case.
Yeah, Wickard versus Filburn.
Crazier yet.
Decided that even wheat grown on a farmer's farm that was consumed entirely on that farm was appropriately subject to federal legislation and federal regulation simply because it might have an economic impact outside the farm and outside that state. This is how often it's been over the last 80 years, and this is what propels this kind of out-of-control federal spending that produces a $25 trillion debt.
It's unbelievable. And then the most radical among them assert, hey, federalism. I'm going, what the hell are you talking about? With all due respect, it would undermine at least half the New Deal. Do they even know what they're talking about? I don't think they do.
No, they don't. To the extent that they do, they carefully obscure it because deep down they don't want federalism. Because deep down they know that federalism means smaller, more limited government in general. And the simple fact is, Mark, that if decisions that need to be made at the state level were in fact being made there, if they started and finished there, we'd have a very different system of government. Even our response to COVID-19 would be different. Say, for example, if governors, having made the decision to shut down their state's economies, actually then had to worry about the economic impacts of that, rather than going to Uncle Sam, going to Washington and saying, write us a big, huge check, you would have a very different set of conversations going on. Mm-hmm. You'd have massive protests in front of governors' mansions and state capitals throughout the country. Instead, they're trying to shift all of the economic burden of that onto Washington, and our only trick here at this point is basically to print more money.
If there's a phase 4, as Minuchin suggested today, Schumer said it should be at least as robust as the $2.2 trillion, just so you know. And it involves infrastructure and broadband, and you got Van Holling saying that we ought to pay for rent, we ought to do this with it. There's not going to be any end to this, is there, Senator?
Yeah. So again, here I am. Who is this Senator Minuchin, or this Congressman Minuchin? Who on earth is he? Who gave him power to negotiate for Congress? I find this absolutely insane. Almost as insane as I find the idea that we can spend that much more money, effectively just printing it, without causing massive, abrupt, draconian devaluation of currency as it's out in the marketplace right now. Who does that affect more than anybody else? Well, poor middle-class Americans. This is wrong. We need to be very, very careful about how we do this.
And this can spark hyperinflation and deflation, affect every retired individual, every student, every paycheck, every pension, every medical plan. It is devastating. It's like fire to an economy, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Now, look, if you're really rich, if you're a former partner of Goldman Sachs like Steve Minuchin or somebody else, you're probably going to be great. In fact, you might even, who knows, make money off of this. I don't know. But poor middle-class Americans are going to get screwed by this. It's really wrong. And I think we ought to be concerned about it. Right now, very few people are talking about it, and the fact that he's speaking about it so flippantly, so glibly, so lightly, ought to be troubling to all of us.
Do you think there are enough senators talking about now, not even the phase 3, we're talking about phase 4. We don't even have a phase 3 yet. We're talking about phase 4. And Minuchin even said, when he was asked, by a reporter actually asked a good question. And she said, are there going to be other phases after this? He said he doesn't expect, but, we can always reconsider. That's when I blew my lid, and I said, all right, that's enough. We can't just sit quietly this. Don't you think it's important to send a message to the Treasury Department and even the White House, at least a significant number of serious conservatives in the Senate, if there are any left beyond a handful, that that's it. Open the economy wherever we can. Do it responsibly. Encourage the governors to do it as you are. But that's enough. No more of this massive spending.
Yeah. And the absolute worst thing we could be saying right now is, don't worry, we're about to spend another $2.5 trillion. First of all, that creates an expectation that isn't sustainable. Secondly, this guy has no right to commit that on our behalf. I really don't know who put him in charge of negotiating this, but I think he's done a terrible job. At least a terrible job. If by a good job we would mean someone who would negotiate Republican ideals and conservative principles.
Where's the $2.2 trillion that was passed? Do we even know where all that went?
Yeah, I mean, not all of it's spent yet, but most of it is either spent or well on its way toward.
But it moved fast. Doesn't that demonstrate that you can't replace an economy even with deficit spending?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we in that initial in that phase 3 legislation, we appropriated $350 billion toward this PPP program. That was spent in a matter of about 2 weeks. And,
by the way, Mike, I have serious small business people saying to me that unless their bank has some relationship with the SBA, they're not even getting responded to. I'm not sitting here, as a senator's office, as a staffer, trying to help people get their Social Security checks. I'm just saying, there is apparently a real defect in this, because I'm getting contacted by a lot of people I know, and they're saying, wait a minute, my bank is saying, we're having trouble because we don't have a relationship with the SBA. They say, look at Bank of America, and I don't know this to be true, but they pointed out Bank of America, they're taking their biggest customers first, so you have these chains, these companies with restaurant chains and everything getting in line. You have Ivy League schools with relationships with banks that are getting subsidized, sitting on 10, 15, $20 billion endowments. I don't think a lot of this money is going where it's supposed to go.
No, that's exactly right. And anecdotally, I can tell you, I'm hearing widespread reports of this very same thing, of people feeling like their banks are prioritizing their largest corporate and institutional customers and clients, and the small and mid-sized business is getting the short end of the stick. I've also got anecdotal evidence suggesting credit unions have been a little bit better in that regard. At least in Utah, I've gotten a lot of indications of that. But it does trouble me that there is this natural inclination to do that. And this is one of the things that happens when government spends in such large sums without giving a whole lot of thought beforehand about how it's going to work.
Senator Mike Lee, I appreciate it. You're going to, I guess, shelter in place in Washington, D.C., or the environs there for a while. And I want to wish you all the best and my best to your family.
Thank you very much, Mark.
All right, God bless. We'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
Amen.